Now to other news, and a top Russian lawmaker is ridiculing a US intelligence report that found Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, personally ordered an influence campaign to boost Donald Trump's chances in November's US election. CNN contributor and former Moscow bureau chief Jill Doherty has more now on the reaction in Russia.
President Putin is not engaging, not making any comments about this report. Saturday, a holiday here in Russia. It's Russian Orthodox Christmas, and the president was shown on Russian television going off to church but making absolutely no comment. Meanwhile, the Russian media are commenting, and essentially what they're doing is dismissing and laughing at this report. They are not engaging with any specifics. In fact, in many of the reports, they're saying there were no specifics. Margarita Simonyan, for example, who is the editor-in-chief of RT Television, mentioned liberally in that report, laughed at it and said, "This is a laugh of the year. Are you kidding?" She said the information contained was outdated and, in fact, wrong. Another person who is very influential in the Twitter sphere, and that is Alexei Pushkov. He is a member of parliament, and he said, quote, "The mountain gave birth to a mouse." In other words, he's saying all of the accusations are based on, as he put it, confidence, in quotes, and assumptions. And he mentioned that the U.S. was just as confident about the fact that, or the allegation that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Meanwhile, President-elect Trump is tweeting about an improved relationship between Russia and the United States. There's no direct reaction, but obviously the Russians have been saying for quite some time that is precisely what they want, and they seem to be counting down the days until he is inaugurated.
Jill Doherty reporting there. Let's look in a bit more detail at those tweets that Jill mentioned. On Saturday, Donald Trump wrote, "Having a good relationship with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing. Only stupid people or fools would think that it is bad. We have enough problems around the world without yet another one. When I am president, Russia will respect us far more than they do now. And both countries will perhaps work together to solve some of the many great and pressing problems and issues of the world." Well, for further insight, let's bring in Scott Lucas. He's a professor of international politics at the University of Birmingham here in England. Thanks very much for being on the programme, Professor. I want to ask you first about your reaction to those tweets. What might a good relationship with Russia look like?
Well, for Donald Trump, it's one in which he gets to be best friends with Vladimir Putin, and the two men create their own image of the world. The problem with that is that it ignores the fact that Russia has its own interest, Putin has his own interest, and they very aggressively have pursued them. They're pursuing them in Eastern Europe, they're pursuing them in the Middle East, and they pursued them by intervening in the US election. Cold fact. So Trump's trying to sweep all that away and say, oh, well, we can be best friends. At the same time, however, remember that he's saying we should have a nuclear arms race, which doesn't seem to fit very well with an improved relationship. This is very much Trump's personal opinion.
Is there an element, though, of you scratch my back, now I'll scratch yours? And although Donald Trump has dismissed the suggestion that Russia's influence may have had any control whatsoever on the election victory, on his election victory, is there a bit of like, well, this is payback time and I owe you one?
I wouldn't call it payback as much as the fact that Donald Trump has always basically put an admiration for Putin above any type of consideration of specific issues between the U.S. and Russia. For example, remember during the Republican primaries, well before the general election, he talked about Putin as being this great leader, this admirable man. Trump did not address the fact that while we do not want to go to war with Russia, there are issues of conflict. Remember that Russia annexed Crimea 2 years ago, leading to U.S. and European sanctions. Trump did not address the Russian involvement in the Syrian civil war, which has been destabilizing. So this, again, it's really more Trump's narcissism. He wants to be like Putin. He admires Putin rather than any type of, a sensible or coherent approach to foreign policy.
So much has been made of Donald Trump's rhetoric, if you like, not least the language that he uses on Twitter as well. What do you make of this stupid comment that anyone who effectively disagrees with him, seemingly, is branded stupid? Is this a sign of more to come?
Oh, yeah. Well, Donald Trump's always said that anyone disagrees with him isn't very smart. But I think there's something that's being missed here about those latest tweets. You'll notice that Trump has shifted. He is no longer talking about the intelligence behind the Russian hacking being wrong. He's no longer criticizing the intelligence agencies as he was all through last week. Remember when he said only a few days ago, oh, I know what really happened about hacking, and I'll tell you, and he never did? So Trump's saying, oh, everyone's stupid, let's just be nice to Russia, is trying actually to cover up the fact I think he's on the defensive now over the allegations that were in the report released on Friday about the extent of Russian involvement.
Yeah, very interesting. What might Russia, though, have to gain if it is accepted that it did interfere with the US election and backed Trump? What does Russia get to get out of that?
Oh, what Russia got, and it's clear from the unclassified version of the report, and it will be to a greater detail in the top secret version, is they kept Hillary Clinton out of office. Putin personally does not like Hillary Clinton. And in his eyes, Clinton and others in the Obama administration called him an illegitimate president. Beyond that, if Clinton became president, there would be a much tougher U.S. line, for example, over the Middle East, including Syria. There would be a much tougher line over the crisis over Ukraine and Crimea, and Moscow didn't want that.
Always great to talk to you, Scott Lucas, there live from Birmingham here in the UK. Thanks very much indeed for your insight.
Thank you.
Hello, welcome. You're watching RT International and our look back at the main stories that shaped the last 7 days. Now, this week, the US intelligence community released a much-anticipated report on accusations that Russia meddled in the 2016 US presidential election. The report claims that Russia hacked into emails in a scheme ordered by President Putin to influence the result, although no proof was provided to back up the claims. Accusations were also levelled at this channel based on out-of-date information. With more, here's Emily Sue.
Another day, another U.S. intelligence report armed with damning allegations against Russia without any concrete evidence. Except this is not just any other report. This is the long-anticipated report, which is supposed to include conclusive evidence to shed new light on alleged Russian hacking to interfere with the U.S. presidential election.
New details on the Russians' motives for hacking and leaking.
Russian hackers intervened in the U.S. election.
Well, prepare to be disappointed, because although the public version makes the same claims as the classified version, it doesn't come with the evidence. Maybe the full version is more convincing, but that's something you or me will never know, especially when the report's authors aren't that confident themselves.
Now, what's so curious about that, on the one judgment that they said, oh yeah, we all three agree about Russian interference, except it was only CIA and FBI that strongly agreed, but NSA, who's the only one in that group that would actually have the physical evidence of the hacking, if it existed, is the one that says, well, our judgment's moderate. It's a joke. If I'm a Russian intelligence analyst, I would be suspicious to think, what are the Americans up to? They really can't be this stupid. And let me just reassure the folks on your side of the ledger, yeah, they actually are.
The devil's in the detail, they say. But given it's a top security report, you'd expect it to be meticulous. Turns out, not quite. To begin with, the report uses outdated information. The named head of RT Arabic no longer works with the channel. They also got RT's London bureau chief wrong. That was like 10 years ago. Newsflash, it's 2017. The sloppiness doesn't stop here. The report goes on to accuse two new shows on RT, Breaking the Set and Truth Seeker, of overwhelmingly focused on criticism of US and Western governments. They were taken off air over 2 years ago. Last but not least, the report quoted an article they thought was written on the 4th of July, but it was actually published on April the 7th. The point being that the researchers didn't realize Russia uses the European date format of putting the day ahead of the month instead of the other way around. RT's editor-in-chief, represented in cartoon form in the report, said the authors really should have done their homework better.
Dear CIA, all that you've written deserves to be graded F. The subject is covered badly, there's no attribution to the sources, the information is out of date and/or incorrect, the research looks like it's been done by an amateur. In our espionage school, you would have been canned for a lack of effort, which, as a matter of fact, is quite painful.
And they sue RT Moscow.
Well, our channel is almost centre stage in this US intelligence report. The 25-page document does contain a 7-page section dedicated entirely to RT. It states that our channel is overwhelmingly focusing on criticism of the US and other Western governments, which is apparently unacceptable, according to the authors. Daniel Hawkins takes a look at the coverage that may have angered Washington.
Criticism of Russia by the Western media comes under the auspice of freedom of speech and press. Criticism in the other direction, it seems, is not so acceptable. But what is the evidence presented? Well, let's start with the US elections, for example. RT's hosting of third-party debates back in 2012 and last year seemingly really got under the DNI's skin. Recent polls, of course, suggest that nearly 40% of Americans identify themselves as independent rather than Republican or Democrat. Is giving airtime to alternative candidates really a sign of a Kremlin conspiracy? If so, we have a few more culprits.
Joining us now is the Libertarian presidential nominee, Governor Gary Johnson from New Mexico, and his running mate, Governor William Weld from Massachusetts. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you. What an opportunity. Yeah, thank you.
Many Democrats looking forward to nominating Hillary Clinton to become the first woman president. Clinton is not the only woman in the race, though. Dr. Jill Stein.
Now, if that's not enough evidence of an election hack, surely giving WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange a platform will convince you of a Moscow WikiLeaks plot. Except Assange has repeatedly denied its source is the Russian government, and his interviews are not limited to RT.
Our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party. This is something a 14-year-old kid could have hacked. We're a media organization, and media organizations have an obligation to protect their sources.
Presumably, Fox and CNN will be next on the DNI blacklist. And speaking of the mainstream channels, another RT sin is apparently covering the following topics: infringements of civil liberties, police brutality, Wall Street greed, because apparently covering topics of genuine concern to the public and underreported by other channels is enough to make an outlet guilty of manipulating its audience. And to do that, all tools are deployed: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. And RT successfully managing to attract millions of followers is proving to be a sore point. Jealous, perhaps? If being at the forefront of reaching our audience through evolving platforms is a crime, guilty as charged. With RT's motto of question more being the point of covering stories underreported by the corporate media, giving a platform to alternative voices and challenging the mainstream narrative, the DNI report looks less like a smoking gun and more of an endorsement of RT's work.
Well, since Russia's been accused of trying to sway American voters, we did ask people in Washington whether Moscow's alleged efforts have been successful.
Did Vladimir Putin influence your decision on who to vote for?
Not at all. Not at all.
No one impacted my vote except for me.
No, I was pretty solid on my decision pre all the Vladimir Putin drama.
He called me directly, Putin did, and told me how I should vote. No, I think that's the biggest farce.
Could the Russians have maybe controlled your mind without you knowing about it?
I don't believe so.
I'm sure that, like, they've influenced the election in certain ways, but not mind control.
Oh my God, no.
The American intelligence services say that the American public's minds were manipulated by Russia, and that's why people voted for Trump. Do you buy it?
Not at all. I just think that they might have had their hand in it. I don't think they influenced the election that much.
I think that there are a lot of other things that were as work it well. You know, you have a weak candidate, things along those lines. So I think that there are many other factors that played a larger role.
Well, the discrepancies in the US intelligence report, as well as the lack of hard evidence, have been ridiculed. Some joke that the document was a Kremlin disinformation plot to discredit US intelligence, and others have compared it to a rushed student project that was due in the next day.
Genuinely believed it was the Daily Mash or some other such humorous site which had done a spoof, because it seems like such a mockery of what we've had, which is weeks and weeks of assertion without evidence, and this is so totally devoid of evidence that I thought it must be a joke. And when I discovered it was actually serious, I'm really taken aback, and I do urge everybody watching to get online. It's quite easy to find and read through the thing, because it is absolutely an astonishing piece of work. It contains no evidence whatsoever. But of course, the reason that it contains no evidence whatsoever is there is no evidence, because the assertions it is making are factually untrue, so there couldn't be evidence.
Our intelligence community has lost the professional discipline
of an intelligence function. And this is very dangerous because, and that's why I'm an advocate for what President-elect Trump is doing by challenging what they're saying, because they need to be challenged, because they're not being professional and disciplined in what they're doing. A lot of it's being politically motivated. I mean, the claim is that the Russians affected the election. So, I mean, it's like the Democrats are pushing it because they lost. So, in that sense, that's their scapegoat. Well, we lost because of the Russians. You know, that's the whole idea.
They have admitted there is no single intercept that was a smoking gun. In other words, there was no absolute proof. And in fact, it troubled me that they relied on the fact that they detected that that the inner circle in Russia was very pleased that Trump was elected president. Well, I was very pleased that Trump was elected president, so I'm not sure. Am I guilty of hacking because of that?
Well, as we mentioned earlier, the report does contain a disclaimer saying that it doesn't provide actual proof, and this is not the first time either that such a provision has been included in an official US intelligence document. RT's Miguel Francis Santiago explains.
No solid evidence to prove Russia hacked the election? Just shove in a disclaimer and it's problem solved. This joint FBI and Homeland Security report from last week with its scary name, Grisly Step, Russian malicious cyber activity, all to convince you Russia is guilty. Never mind it's for informational purposes only and provides no guarantees. But that was enough for Obama to expel 35 Russian diplomats, nearly causing an international scandal because Russia apparently interfered to help Trump. Washington says there is evidence.
President Obama and this administration is 100% certain in the role that Russia played in trying to sow doubt and confusion and getting involved through the cyber domain into our electoral process. The information is there and it's rock solid.
No, seriously, it's there somewhere.
Included in that report were specific included in that report was specific technical advice. I think it's an indication that the intelligence community is following more than their gut instinct. And I think the way that you can tell that is based on the technical analysis that was put forward. It doesn't mean that there isn't additional evidence out there. I'm sure that there is. But there is a priority that's placed on protecting sources and methods.
The intel chiefs know for sure. Just wait for it.
We plan to brief the Congress and release an unclassified version of this report to the public early next week. But until then, we're really not prepared to discuss this beyond standing by our earlier statements.
Ah, there it is, at last. Oh wait, what's this? Of course, a disclaimer detailing levels of confidence. I'm not kidding. They're even graded from low to high. And apparently the NSA is only moderately confident in this one. There's your tangible proof and real evidence, ladies and gentlemen. Blame Russia. Miguel Francis Santiago, RT.
Well, from the start, the US mainstream media have been quick to get their teeth into the Russian hack story, and CNN was one of the first.
Russian hacks.
Russian hacking malware.
Russian cyber attacks.
The Russian hacking operation was detected.
President-elect Trump just last night continued to dismiss both Moscow's involvement and the importance of the hacking at all.
That last part there was aired in December but has come under scrutiny this week because it was spotted that CNN had used an extract from a video game in its coverage related to the so-called Russian hacks. Another US media outlet was also criticised for its coverage too. The Washington Post retracted on its original story about Russian hackers meddling with the state of Vermont power grid. An editor's note a few days after the initial publication clarified that Russia didn't do it. Once again, we asked members of the public if they could guess who broke the initial story and whether it was true.
Tell me, true or false, that Russia hacked into a computer system in Vermont and exposed a security breach in the electrical grid? True or false?
I did hear that true. I did hear that was true.
I heard the story. I don't know if it's true, but I did hear the story in the mainstream media.
Gonna go with true on that one. Pretty sure I heard about that in the news.
It's actually false.
All right, I'm gonna go with false on that one.
So, who do you think reported that? Was that CNN, Washington Post, or was it a Russian news outlet?
If it's false, I'm going to go with not CNN or Washington Post. But I don't know why the Russians would want to say that that happened either.
And I believe it was something that came from Donald Trump administration or his office or something.
I think I heard it somewhere like CNN.
It's actually Washington Post that it turned out to be false. So, do you feel like people here in D.C. are in a little bit of a news bubble? Like maybe they only hear like one side of the story?
Definitely, yes, definitely.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The Washington Post, the New York Times, MSNBC, CNN, absolutely. They're the real fake news.